I'm gonna do a reading from my new book, which is called A Cult of One. Writing this thing was like pulling teeth. It was bloody hard. It took me 3 years to do. I actually haven't read the book front back. So I don't even know if it's good. So what I'm going to read to you now, it's story time with Daddy Grannon, which was the alternative name that Jacob wanted to give it. Can we call this stream Story Time with Daddy Grannon? So it's got a nice ring to it, but let's not. Okay, so this is from chapter 1, which is called The Fight of My Life. By the time the second punch hit me in the jaw, I sensed, even through my drunken stupor, that my face was actually taking on damage. Despite the alcohol, it occurred to me that a speedy response on my part would be required to allay further injury. I used a tie clinch to my opponent's neck and drew him into my shoulder to smother the surprisingly heavy hooks he was landing. That stopped the punches, though I did not know it yet, had permanently dislocated my jaw. We wrestled a little. I couldn't see him because he was so close, and my world was momentarily a claustrophobic, dark space of panting breath, grunts, and the sound of our shoes scuffing the floor as we battled for a dominant position. I released the clinch, and he took the bait. He drew back his meaty fist to hit me again. I saw the opportunity, and I caught him squarely in the nose with a pretty solid headbutt, sending blood squirting down his T-shirt. This is a book on overcoming codependency, isn't it? It's very violent.
You wrote it.
Who wrote this? Headbutting people in the nose. My opponent was a solidly built Greek man, squat and girthy. Oh, he had clearly trained, as his jaw-breaking punches had shown me, and beneath this fat was real strength. He went in with an upper body clinch to prevent further skull-to-nose contact, and as he wound me into an over-under clinch, I felt the fear that something terrible might befall me. I responded with a jumping guard. This is a move from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where you hold the opponent in a clinch and jump up, wrapping your legs around his torso and dragging him to the ground. You end up on your back. This sounds disadvantageous, I know, but if you know your submissions, it's a potentially good strategy. The trick is that you must be comfortable delivering arm bars or triangle chokes. Let me say this, it's fine in competition, and it works great on a safe matted surface in the gym. However, I would not recommend doing it on a tarmac footpath, as I did that evening. My spine and the back of my head clonked onto the hard path, and my body loudly announced that I had done something both stupid and injurious to my person. I pulled him into a deep, closed guard to keep him from using those sheep-shearing Greek farmer's fists on my face any further. That's funny, that, Jacob. That made me laugh, that. Sheep-shearing farmer's fists. Oh, I tell you what. My jaw was dislocated and my left eye was rapidly closing up. I was prepared to triangle choke or arm bar him when he inevitably posted up, meaning he tried to push away and get upright with his arms. He was ready to go on punching my face into oblivion. Luckily, the now dreaded farmer's fists of ancient Sparta never landed, as if by some far-off signal heard only by the two of us, locked in that intimate embrace. We simply stopped. It was over. Our bodies agreed. I unlocked my position and we both stood up and looked at each other, a little bewildered. His nose was mashed. My face was blowing up like a pumpkin. The skirmish was brief and violent and left us both a little shocked, I think. We staggered away from each other, perhaps with a little more respect for the other than at the initiation of the event. He left holding his newly reconfigured nose, and me, my mashed mandible. This was a fight that I got into at York University at 2 a.m. after about 6 solid hours of drinking. It was one of many I mysteriously found myself in as a 20-something. I only fought when I could see that a friend was in real danger. The problem was that I had idiotic and reckless friends. Privileged kids from private school who enjoyed the adrenaline rush of a brawl. They got away with a few bumps and scrapes. I, on the other hand, had an eye that was completely closed for 3 days, and my bite is still not aligned properly 2 decades later. Bearing the burden of other people's poor decisions cheerfully is something of a theme in my life. At age 21, as a devout martial arts enthusiast, I had a penchant for getting into fights with the kind of delusional confidence in my own indestructibility which is only afforded to those young enough to know no better. I had not internalized truths that I now consider to be self-evident. For example, There are bigger, tougher, nastier people out there. Even if you beat them, they might come to your house. If you're not in, they will deliver their vengeance to whomever is. Or even if you win, the bigger your win, the more jail time you can get, and the nastier the prison you can end up in. Or simply, I really, really, really don't want to go to prison. Ever, not even for fraud in Denmark in one of their famous luxury 5-star jails. And most importantly, the body can break, and the injuries can be lifelong. These things had to be learned with time, bitter experience, and suffering. In my younger, dumber days, I used to let people have the first shot. Such was my undue confidence. I was also convinced that everyone who started fights or willingly got into fights didn't actually know how to fight. That turned out not to be true. There are people out there who are professional fighters who enjoy starting shit when drunk and high specifically for the thrill of using their skills in what is essentially justified assault. So when I met the aforementioned stout Greek student who, it turned out, had served in the Greek army and could actually fight, I received what we might call in therapy feedback from reality. My assumptions about the world, that I was indestructible, that justice was somehow on my side because I hadn't started the fight, did not pass what is known in psychology as the reality test. My cracked jaw was the feedback needed to knock a hole in my worldview. It did me some good, but the towering wall of arrogance I lived behind would require a few more knocks yet. My friends, I now see looking back, started fights knowing that I would assist them. They also did it to enjoy the spectacle of watching me go. They were not rough types, far from it. They were the wealthy kids of doctors, lawyers, and accountants who lived in mansions in Cheshire with tennis courts and swimming pools. They really just liked the buzz of a tear-up without having to contend with the consequences. When I say being the one to come off worse is a recurrent theme in my life, I mean that I was usually some variation of the peacekeeper, the burden bearer, or black sheep. If someone were going to get left carrying the can, it would most likely be me. Why was I willing to sacrifice myself and my face for my friends? It's a question I didn't even begin to ask myself until I was in my 30s. By then, I was desperately trying to pull myself out of a spiral of alcohol, drugs, promiscuity, violence, and abusive relationships. It's the standard night out in Liverpool, really, Jacob. The answer I found was rooted in my childhood and in a series of poor decisions that sent me careening towards self-destruction when what I really wanted all along was love and safety. It is the same issue that many of us face today. Not being able to love, as my Jordan Peterson moment. There's just not enough love, you know. Not being able to love or take care of ourselves properly, not being able to put our needs first, not being able to ask for or go for what we truly want, feeling compelled to attach ourselves to selfish people, and trying to win love from those who cannot offer it. This doesn't only apply to our personal relationships. It can expand to include our health, our business lives, and even our relationships with our governments. It all comes down to a fractured self, the need to be servile, and the codependent and toxic attachments we form to tyrannical people, institutions, and governing bodies. I experienced these same problems myself. Self-destructive behavior, trying to please the needs of the worst kinds of people at my own expense, abusive relationships, addictions to sex, to violence and to drugs, social anxiety, awkwardness, self-loathing, and depression. In order to solve these problems, I first needed a term to describe their root cause. I chose the term codependent. In using this term, I'm going a little beyond the boundaries of the way it is typically used. When I use the term codependent, I mean a person who is traumatized and brainwashed into needing to be a slave to abusive, psychopathic, narcissistic, tyrannical types of people and systems in order to feel in any way meaningful, visible, or alive. When I say codependent, I mean a person who has been so thoroughly and consistently abused and objectified, they end up colluding in their own self-eradication. that person may have internalized the abuse to such a degree that they will maintain or even further their self-destruction in the absence of the abuser. Expanding this definition allowed me to understand how I had transformed from a bright, well-educated boy who'd been planning to apply to Cambridge into a fat, broken, bitter, nearly homeless nightclub bouncer who snorted cocaine off a house key in a club toilet before returning to work. I didn't write that. That's the editor. And I feel judged. That's harsh, that. So...
Someone said, ouch.
Yeah. Bloody hell, that. See, I knew I should have proofread this. So how did I get there so quickly? And then less quickly, how did I dig myself back out? First, let's take a look at the classical meaning of the term codependent. Originating from Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, the term referred largely to the partner of an alcoholic who was the enabler of the alcoholism. It was a non-clinical definition that some counselors and therapists used, while many others rejected because it could be as confusing as it was enlightening. Later, in the 1980s, the term gained popularity in best-selling pop psychology books in the USA to describe women, in particular, who were overgiving in relationships and who lacked boundaries. Oh no. Janet G. Wojciech's, I hope I got that right, Adult Children of Alcoholics came out in 1983. It sold 2 million copies and stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for 48 weeks. Robin Norwood's Women Who Love Too Much, 1985, sold 2.5 million copies and spawned 12-step groups across the country for women who were addicted to men. Melody Beattie popularized the concept of codependency in 1986 with the book Codependent No More, which sold 8 million copies. These wildly successful books in the 80s massively increased the usage of the term codependency, though they are now sometimes viewed a bit sniffily by the academic community as being popularized by self-help gurus. The consensus at the time was that the term became overused, misapplied, and eventually misused. Nowadays, it's understood to be a layman's term for hyperagreeableness and possibly a clinically diagnosable dependent personality disorder. Today, in psychology, the term codependent might raise a few eyebrows, but it's not wildly controversial, and everyone knows pretty much what you mean if you use it. But what do I mean when I say it, and why do I use it? When I think of a codependent state, I visualize two circles overlapping. Each circle represents a person, and as the circles overlap, each person has entered the other's space. When we have two people in each other's spaces, we have weaknesses in key areas. Boundaries, the sense of self, agency, sovereignty, responsibility, assertiveness, directness, clarity, emotional regulation, and independence. When I think about sovereignty or independence, I think of an unbroken circle that stands alone. Here we have an unbroken perimeter and no porous or weak boundaries, like a single cell that is functional. The good things that the cell needs to nourish itself stay inside, and the bad things that are toxic to the cell stay outside where they belong. When I visualize the two circles overlapping, sometimes I imagine a strong circle drawn with a thick line, overlapping with a weak circle whose perimeter is drawn with dots. I think of the strong dominant circle dwarfing and overpowering the smaller, weaker circle. This represents a codependent relationship becoming truly toxic and even abusive. The unbroken circle is independent. The overlapping circles, one being submissive and the other parasitic, are codependent. In my opinion, there is no such thing as a neutral state of codependency. When boundaries are infringed upon and we are in each other's spaces or carrying each other's loads, I believe that the situation is always somewhere on the spectrum of toxicity and manipulation. Imagine a scenario wherein a girl aged 26 decides it's time to settle down and get with an older, more responsible man to build a future together. She finds a guy who's aged 35, who has a job, is charming and charismatic, and says he wants a family one day. When they actually move in together, however, she finds that on a daily basis, his actions reflect a desire not for long-term future building, but for passing pleasure. Drinking with friends, playing video games, and going out to restaurants. He doesn't seem to save money and isn't interested in her conversations about mortgages or pension schemes. In an effort to make the relationship work, she then begins to pick up his slack. After all, he's not abusive. Maybe he just needs a nudge in the right direction. At that moment, to help him be an adult, she has chosen to carry his responsibilities for him. Whatever happens next in this story, be it 3 months later or 13 years later with kids involved, she will feel the weight of resentment for doing his adulting for him. He, of course, will remain blissfully unaware. Instead of reciprocating or meeting her where she is, he will simply let this happen, thinking, wow, my girl is so cool. She does this so that I could just chill. It's not dramatic or film-worthy. Technically, it's not even really abuse, but it's absolutely a codependent relationship and will lead to terrible problems in the future. Going back to our two circles, we can see that the small circle represents the codependent victim, but the two circles are both engaged in a codependent mode of being. Does that mean that the big circle, the abuser or predator, is codependent? In my view, any person who is not openly expressing their intent in an adult way and whose sense of self or purpose in the world is dependent on a singular other or multiple others is indeed codependent. Not all would agree. The small circle in our overlapping circles is what I call an echo. It does not self-direct and it is not attached to its own source. It is like a moon reflecting the light of the sun. It does not radiate for itself, it only reflects. The big circle radiates light, but its light cannot be seen without a reflection. That's where the small circle comes in. So this book, A Cult of One, it's available now on Amazon. It's done really well so far. It's only been out a couple of weeks, and it was an Amazon bestseller in the UK and USA for a little bit there. Feedback's good. The main objective of the book is to teach people to get a different perspective on narcissistic abuse and codependent relationships, and really to overcome codependency, to grow up, to become an adult, and to individuate in the Jungian sense from these unconscious patterns of behavior that we usually pick up in childhood because we were probably all raised in families where a certain degree of codependency was present in our parents and in, other family members and other role models we had around us. So that's my little read in there, and I hope you enjoyed it.